Josh Raven here with the Daily Dart at DreamHack Masters Malmö, joined by Anders the caster, but we're not going to be talking about DreamHack Masters for a change. I think I want to take us all on a little journey. We're going to go back to a younger, fresh-faced Anders before the days of casting in front of thousands of people, to a young lad living in, I believe it's pronounced Farum or something like that, just outside Copenhagen, and kind of how it was like growing up for you there as someone who was getting into video games and how that kind of led to this.
So this is so long ago now that back then there weren't that many people into video games. I had one classmate in a class of 22, I think, and another guy I knew who was sort of a grade above me. So that makes 3 out of 40 people or something like that who are into video games, and it wasn't like horrible or anything, but it was always something that people made a lot of fun of. And I remember my parents would always say to me, "Don't stay inside and play video games. Your eyes will go square," and all of those things. So I mean, it sort of the whole video games explosion only happened after I quit elementary school and moved out of Farum for a while. So. I don't know. It wasn't horrible. I hated school desperately, but not because of video games or anything like that. But I do think sort of my lack of interest in going to school and being there, video games became sort of an escape for that, definitely.
So do you remember anything that was special about the summer of 1999, perhaps on a train ride or something like that?
Summer of 1999. Jesus.
Is it ringing a bell?
I remember I was on the train ride New Year's heading into, but that's not the summer, obviously. You're going to have to give me more clothes here.
Yeah, that was different. No, because remember something about you being on a train coming back from a LAN centre, having the thought.
Yeah. No, I know exactly what you mean now. Right, so this is way back when Counter-Strike is still in the really early beta stages. 99, I can't tell you exactly what beta it is, but yeah. So because everyone had really bad PCs back then, the reason you'd go to a LAN center is because the LAN center would have way better computers than you would, sort of the latest hardware. So you'd go there, and then what we would do is we'd pay to sort of play from midnight to 8 in the morning, so like an 8-hour stretch. And you used to be there all night. And people could smoke indoors back then as well, so it'd be like a smoke-filled room with, teenagers and a couple of weird adults playing video games, stuff like that. So we'd be going home early in the morning, and I remember that feeling, because we've been playing computer games inside for 8 hours in a row, and back then it was all Counter-Strike, all 8 hours were Counter-Strike. So when you close your eyes, you'd have, sort of the crosshair and AWP still sort of imprinted on the back of your eyes. You'd see it, and you talk over all the kills you'd got. I remember that one time, 6 hours ago, I got amazing kills. Just that would be the whole train ride home for an hour, just people talking about that. So yeah, that's just one of those childhood things. I think everyone who's played Counter-Strike as a kid, and I assume people who do it, who are kids today and play this version of Counter-Strike, feel something similar. It somehow sticks with you, even though it's hard to explain how that works. I mean, when I think about it logically, I can't explain exactly how that works, but it does.
Okay, well, moving forward perhaps a little bit, you said you didn't like school very much, but you did go to university in Copenhagen, right, for sciences, biologies and physics and things like that. What happened with that? Why did you choose to go down a different path rather than sticking with those kind of things, a more academic side of things?
Oh, we could go really deep with this question. So I think like almost everyone else I know of my generation, and I think it's become worse in the next generation as far as I can tell, but people don't know what they actually want to do with their lives. And I think I chose university because I wanted to prove to everyone I was really smart, which is a horrible motivation to go to university or really do anything actually, but it was the best that I could do. So physics, it is an interest of mine, it still is, but there's a difference between being sort of casually interested in physics and maths and grinding through a university course or a bachelor's degree. And I think that I only realized that once I started it, that the people who were there, they were good and they were fun, and some of them were definitely also better than me at the actual coursework. But more than that, they really loved it, and I didn't. I thought it was tedious after a while. So then I sort of quit that and did biology. If you're an American viewer, by the way, in Denmark, they pay you to go to university, so you can just spend a ridiculous amount of time doing stuff like this. But so I had read a bunch of Richard Dawkins books about biology and evolution, all those things. So I thought this were great. And it was all right for the first sort of 6 months, and then afterwards I felt a little bit like, it's not really, what am I even doing? What am I going to do at the end of this? I wasn't even sure. And then I felt English has always been sort of a passion of mine, something I care about, something I think is interesting. So I thought, even if this is sort of the thing that I care the most about, at least I'll be good at it. So I have like a mix of being good at it and also sort of caring about it, which worked almost to the end. I almost got there. It was like 2 years and then some to finish my bachelor's degree. But ultimately, I think at the end I started losing interest. There were too many grammar courses that I didn't enjoy, and I don't exactly know what it was. I mean, again, I think it's just sort of the lack of having a goal and not really knowing what you're actually doing. And then I stumbled on this casting thing, and then that turned out to be it. So.
Well, I was going to say, you went on to casting, but before that, apparently there was something to do with database management or something like that. I was going to ask, how does that compare to perhaps casting in front of 100,000 people or something in an arena?
So yes, so all the while I was doing this university stuff, this spans sort of trying to think of how many years it is, like 6 years or something like that, where I'm sort of in and out of university and doing different things. All the while when I'm not at university, so whenever you quit a course halfway through, you obviously got to spend the rest of the year doing something else, right? Until you could reapply for a course next time around. I had a sort of a position at a local company that did databases, and initially it was all design stuff, layout and alignment and making sure all the fonts are the same. It's a very, very tedious work that anyone can do who has like any interest in computers, right? But after a while, I started sort of picking up some of the coding stuff, and they also sort of said, if you're interested, you would try and do some things, right? So I did that, and slowly developed into it more, and essentially just ended up doing a lot of the database coding for that company. That's an incredibly stressful job. If you have the sort of mind that I do, I have a very hard time switching off my mind when I go back home. And some of the clients we would have were absolutely massive clients, sort of on an international scale. So when you're making changes in the database and you're sort of changing the programming and making sure things work, you sort of replay all the code in your mind. When you're going home, you think, if I put the wrong signs and put the wrong stuff in, this could break the whole system. You have backups, but those things cost money too to implement a backup from the day before. So that kept me awake at night, and I was a horrible employee in other ways too. I couldn't. I would try and optimize how much time I could spend not doing things. If I had to go for a coffee break, then I'd spend extra 2 minutes. And then I'll print and eat some more paper. I've got to go to the depot to pick up some paper, and just try and find stuff like that. So I wasn't very motivated. But it was a job, right? It paid me money, and it sort of worked out. I'm happy I had that job in the meantime. It's very different, obviously, from doing this.
Well, it doesn't sound like it was too much fun, but you did end up going into casting and such. And I believe the first event we found out was 2013, the Blast, a LAN in Denmark. Do you remember that? Do you remember how that was? What it was like? What it was different about? Obviously, now, a lot was different.
A few things were definitely different. I think they paid me 500 Danish kroner, which I was very pleased about. It's the equivalent of 80 euros or something like that. Very happy about that. It was a huge success. I was very, very pleased. I slept on an inflatable mattress in a sort of huge hall with everybody else who was at the LAN, right? Just had like a blanket covering me. It's great fun. And I don't regret it at all. I met a bunch of Danish players there and got introduced to sort of how everything works on a different scale, right? So it was really good, really fun, and an atmosphere I recognized from going to LANs myself, so it wasn't so alien. But obviously now we stay in hotels with single rooms and everything is very fancy, So it's been a crazy development in that sense.
Is there any part of you that kind of misses that kind of thing? Obviously now it's arguably way better, right? You get a hotel room, you get paid more, and you get better production. But is there any part of you that misses the old school kind of stuff like that?
But there are some things that are different when you have a LAN like that. There is, in some ways, weirdly, in some ways, when you're all in one hallway, and you're all in just like one gymnastics room that's been cleared out, all that stuff. there's more focus on competition, you know, because there are almost no spectators. Almost everyone is just there to play. In one way, even the people who are bad at playing are still sort of very interested in how everyone is doing and all that stuff. And because everyone is very near each other when they play, they're sat, you know, monitor to monitor, they could just stand up and yell at each other. You know, you get that instant sort of reaction. You get people trying to almost bully each other a bit, which I think is great, to try and see if they can sort of mentally put each other off, right? I've tried actually to think of a way you could do that on a stage, but I don't know how it would work. But I mean, yeah, that goes away a little bit, that part of it. And I don't know if it's possible to do both. I mean, if I had to choose between that or a stadium, I'd choose a stadium, right?
Well, before we go on to like modern day stuff, questions like that, I was curious, growing up or something like that, what was the best advice you ever got given? And it doesn't have to be related to esports. I'm just curious about that.
Best advice I was ever given? Oh man, I don't know. Does it have to be advice? Could it just be like a lesson?
It can be a little life lesson, maybe a little story.
When I went to high school, I had a teacher in mathematics. It was called Pia. She had the nickname the Terminator at our school, for good reason. She was quite a frightening woman, and I think one of the sharpest sort of math professors I've ever been close to, even I think quicker than the people at university I ran into during physics. She do like just all in small things, you know. She could draw like perfect circles on the blackboard, just, you know, freehand circles, which somehow is very intimidating. You know, just like, that means something is definitely wrong with this person, right? And I said to her during our very first lesson, I said, look, maths I think is a little bit scary. I don't necessarily, you know, I'm not you know, that good at it. So, you know, this stuff about getting up to the blackboard and doing things, you know, in front of the class, you know, demonstrating some piece of math, can I be excused from doing that, at least for a while, you know, just for a couple of weeks or months or something, so I can ease into it, you know? And she just said, look, that's not going to happen. You have an exam at the end of this year, and I want you to be ready for it. So you just got to go and study for that stuff. And I mean, I think that she kind of gave me no option, whereas I feel like in a lot of other parts in my educational life, I've always been able to sort of say, oh, you know, I've got a good explanation for why I'm not able to do this, why I can't do this. There was no arguing that, you know. Couldn't come up with like a good excuse, and obviously saying like, oh, I've been a bit sick, you know, not today. None of that stuff had any impact on her. So, and then I realized actually I was better at it than I thought. So, you know, just kind of kept going from there on out. But that made a difference to me. Maybe that sounds weird. I don't know if that's a weird story, but that made a difference to me.
No, I liked it. I think we've all had a Terminator once in our lives. But yeah. Going up now, obviously casting in front of loads of fans in arenas, getting interviewed by people like me. I'm curious, what is the most annoying question for you whenever you get interviewed?
The most annoying question? I think I'm just going to go on a rant about how esports journalism is horrible. So basically, I understand if you're a journalist, you want to show up and you want to ask, like, how's the tournament been so far? What do you think about this team? Is it shocking this team has won? And it's fine to get sort of recap in, but the problem is you end up answering that question like so many times during the course of a tournament. It becomes a bit weird, you know. I sort of do wish someone would just suddenly, you know, go in and ask different questions. It's sort of like what we've been doing here. It's great. I love it because it's more fun, you know. It's more interesting, right? And I guess sports journalism is no better, right? It's the eternal joke about sports journalists. You know, how was that game? How are you feeling now that you won the game? Obviously great, you know. But it would be fun for someone, because I think the problem is I think this is a problem with esports journalism specifically, is that, and you could tell me this, you could nod in approval. I think people feel like if you're a journalist, you go up to an event, you have to play by the event's rules and the players' rules. If you step on any one of those two, then they'll just kick you out or they'll just refuse interviews. You have no leverage at all as an esports journalist. So even if you wanted to ask aggressive questions or pointed questions, you know, if you wanted to go up to the device and say, hey, when is this streak of disappointment going to stop? Do you feel personally responsible for, you know, you wouldn't be able to say that because you'd be afraid he'd never talk to you again, right? But so something has to change where the journalists have to have, like, I don't know how it works in the regular journalism, but there's something definitely up. I feel differently about it. If people just ask me whatever they want, I'll just say no if I don't want to answer that question, you know.
Well, we're working on it. We'll get there in the end. But so we often see kind of the high points of your job. You're on stage, getting the crowd to cheer, staying in nice hotels, traveling places. So I want to ask the opposite of that. What is the worst part about your job, about being a caster? What do you dislike about it?
I mean, I travel something like 200 days a year, maybe. I have a wife and I have a son at home that's a bit more than a year old, and I don't get to see them anywhere near as much as I would like. It's very hard to make like a family life work when your schedule, you look at a month and then you realize I'm home for 5 days at the beginning of the month and then 3 days at the end, but then the rest of it is all tournaments and traveling. And you've got to realize when you're home, you don't just throw in your clothes on the couch and say that's it, I'm home, I'm relaxing. Emails to respond to. Semler and I are obviously running a company. Someone has to, we have to take care of that. And when you're traveling to the States and back, you've got jet lags. So some of those 5 days are going to be, it's going to be weird. So that's it. That's very, very hard work, I would say. That's, I think, part of it. And obviously this is ridiculous, but someone who spends so much time talking about video games, I don't actually get to play that many video games. You're working all the time instead. So I kind of do miss that. It'd be fun to have more weekends where you could just say, well, I have no responsibilities at all, and I'm just going to play video games. But, yeah.
Well, moving away from you a little bit, but we'll stay in esports. Wondering from your point of view, what do you think is the biggest misconception that a lot of people have about the esports industry? And what do you think people are missing or overlooking?
I guess some of the growth figures are sometimes fairly exaggerated. So the viewership is obviously growing, so you follow that and you think, wow, 10 years from now, this will be the biggest sport on the whole planet, But then you look at sort of the amount of money that's actually coming in, and it doesn't obviously follow that same curve. Not that it's not good, it definitely is good, but I think you always have these answers that people give where they say, it's almost like the NHL, we're almost there. And it's very obviously not. What is happening now is that, and part of the reason for this is that much of the industry is based on what are called endemic sponsors. So headset companies selling headsets to people who want to buy headsets, which is absolutely great. But it also means that everyone is sort of sharing the same pool of money from the headset sponsors, right? They have to pay for the tournaments, for the teams. If anyone has a YouTube channel that's related to it, like it's all coming from the same pool of money, and that means things get a little bit weird after a while. So now we are starting to make a breakthrough into sort of non-endemic sponsors, which could be lifestyle brands. Get Nike, get Coca-Cola on board, and there's been some examples of it in League of Legends, but that seems to be sort of an ecosystem that exists on its own. And annoyingly, because what you'd obviously want is that once MasterCard signs a deal with the LCS, then they say, well, actually this esports stuff is great. Let's look at something else. Doesn't necessarily seem to happen, and it's partly because that world is also hard to get into if you're an advertiser. You can't just pick up the phone and call MasterCard, obviously, and say, let's make a deal. I've got a great product for you. It takes time. So I think that's sort of the something that I don't think people should spend a lot of time thinking about because it's a bit tedious. But it's just something that's not always brought up. That side of it. But I think it's happening now, and I think it's part of the reason why everyone is so anxious to, myself included, to sort of own a piece of it. You want to do that before because once that happens, things will really change.
Well, what I feel like during this interview we've had quite a deep discussion about the importance of things in life. Let's end it on a fun note, I think, before we go. And I want to ask you, of what you can say, because obviously I know a lot of things are not supposed to be shared, but from the after parties, of the stories you can share, what's your favourite one?
The stories I can share? This is obviously tricky. Especially because obviously my wife's standing right next to me. It's scary.
Maybe why I asked.
There's definitely been some fun stories. I've been in a hotel lobby watching Henry wrestle with OJ Borg from ESL for a good 30 minutes. Stone drunk, both of them. That's been an interesting time. I think it definitely gets way edgier than that. I'm trying to think of what. what a really interesting story is. Something that I can say, this is a problem, right? That's where the limit. Because I think after parties tend to go like this. Everyone shows up and is having a drink and a good time, and then at some point, someone, generally Fiflaren, will say, how about we do tequila shots? And then there's like a moment where things get a bit blurry, and then everyone is just off doing weird things. I'll go with the Henry story. I think that's the closest we can get. There's not like a gradient. There's like early after party, and then there's all the stuff we can't talk about.
So pretty much when it comes to the end, that stuff that's pretty much off the record.
Yeah, unless Seuss is around with his mobile phone filming things. But yeah, generally.
Okay.